are live a little bit late here, starting the live episode before a long weekend. You have to forgive us because we're apparently on vacation well before we're on vacation. Cool. Let's get started here. Hello, Smart Money Tree podcast listeners. Welcome to this week's show. My name is Kirk Chisholm. I'll be your host, and today I'm joined with my good friend Phil Weiss. Hey, Phil.
Hey, Kirk. How are you today?
Doing great. Doing great. Getting ready for the long Memorial Day weekend. What are you up to this weekend?
I'm not totally sure. We have a thing in New Jersey to go to, but I had hernia surgery earlier in the week, so I'm not sure that I want to spend 6 hours in the car between there and back. So I don't know. But I do have a son coming home from Seattle, so if I don't go, at least I'll get to spend more time with him. So that's still good.
Well, you know, that's always a confidence booster. Hey, son, I want to spend time with you. It's better than getting hernia surgery.
No, I had the surgery already.
Still better than hernia surgery.
It definitely anything's better than that.
That does not sound fun. Well, thank you for that visual, Phil. I appreciate that.
No problem.
Well, cool. So let's talk about some new stuff this week. I know people are kind of getting ready. I know probably some people in the car. Oddly enough, of course, the news says this will be the biggest travel season in a long time. I haven't spoken to more than one single person who's going anywhere this holiday, and you know what? I think it's glorious. I'm not going anywhere, and it's everything I hope. It's everything I want it to be. Doing nothing, just going to sit around and relax. Hopefully, it's going to be. It was supposed to be in the 50s. Now it's up in the 70s. It's going to be perfect. It's going to be glorious. But interestingly enough, though. This is getting into the summer season where things kind of start to slow down, which will be really interesting because the markets don't seem to be slowing down. We seem to be, if I don't want to say picking up. We had a bad day yesterday, one bad day. It was down 1% or something like that. Wow, that's scary. I expect a few calls from people. Wait, it didn't go up yesterday? What's going on? I bring that up in jest because. I think the one thing that investors really need to understand is this, that investing tends to make you comfortable sometimes when things trend. When things trend, people get comfortable. Oh, it's just going to keep going up. I remember prior to 2022 mentioning to people, the market might decline when rates go up. And they're like, oh, I can handle that, right? And then maybe the portfolio goes down a few percentage points. Like, wait. What you mean my portfolio can go down? Yeah, that's how the markets work. And, I raise this because it's not that they didn't have a tolerance for risk, right? Because they did. They're like, we don't care if it goes down, it'll come back. Like whatever the mentality somebody has is everything's going to be great until the crap hits the fan. And all of a sudden, everyone loses their mind. Wait, what? I can lose money? I don't like losing money. This doesn't feel good. And now, if you were in a period where the markets are going up and down and it was really volatile, you'd probably just get comfortable with it, or you'd put your head in the sand like most investors and just stop opening statements. That's what most people do. But the reality is that markets do go up and they do go down. They go up approximately 70% of the time, and they go down approximately 30% of the time. And then there's a small, very, very small percentage that goes sideways. I mean, really small. But generally they go up 70% of the time. And if that's the case, you just have to understand there are some down periods, and you just have to make sure you're managing your risk for those down periods. But that's not my point. My point is this, is that if your portfolio goes down 2% and you're losing your mind because you think, oh my God, what's going on? Then you're probably taking a lot more risk than you should. And the markets are not that volatile right now. We're in a pretty strong bull market at this moment where things just keep going up and they defy gravity and no one seems to care. That's not a good thing because eventually people will care and it will no longer defy gravity. But you just need to understand that your perspective on your investments will change according to the environment. So if the environment's good, you're going to say you have a high tolerance for risk, because what you really mean is you want to make a lot of return. Now, when the markets are bad, people tend to say they have a low tolerance for risk. And what they really mean is, I don't want to lose any money. Now it's really hard to do both, right? Make money and not lose money. That's really hard. Some people can do it, most people can't. So understand that about yourself, because if you don't understand that about yourself, it tends to cause people to make bad decisions. It's like if you're in a coin flipping contest and you hit heads 10 in a row and you were correct 10 in a row, and then the 11th you're like, I'm going to put every cent I own on this because I'm on a roll. Well, your odds are still 50-50, and that's really dumb. But that's how people think, right? Oh, the market's starting to go up. All right, I'm going to put my foot in the water. And it goes up more. I'm going to put a little bit more. And by the peak, they're like, I'm going all in. I'm borrowing my home equity line to put it in the markets. And then the markets go down, and then people are SOL, right? It's kind of like crypto. After crypto's gone up a few 100%, now you're going to put all your money in it. It's like, no, that wasn't the time to do it. The time to do it was at the low, not at the high. So just something to keep in mind is how you think about things is colored by the market, right? We're always influenced by other things. We don't. There's I've listened to some good podcasts on this, but we don't actually make our own decisions. Like their decisions are mostly given to us, and then we justify them after and say, "Oh, I did it for this reason." That's generally how our brains work. We all think that we make our own decisions, but if you really get into the philosophical part of it, we really don't. Like something happens, and then we decide after, and we justify it with that. So anyway, Phil, what are you seeing this week? What's going on in your world?
So a couple things I want to say. So first, what's been interesting about this month with the market going up is the old adage is sell in May and go away. Well, this May, if you sold and went away, it wouldn't work so well because we've had a really good market. Uh, the second thing is that it really is important that you understand the emotions as you were talking about having making your points. I was thinking about the cycle of market emotions. I don't know if anybody's familiar with that, but it's like a roller coaster. And basically, when the market's down and it starts to go up, you start to dip your toe in the water. And by the time the market's at its top, that's when it's time to be all in. And you think you're so smart because everything you've done has worked really well. And then the market starts to fall and you start to lose a little bit of confidence. You lose a little bit more confidence. And then it gets to the bottom. And that's when the average person exits because you're afraid. There's these emotions. That's what drives so much of what we do. And that's what happens a lot with the markets. Markets go up, markets go down. As you said, about 2/3 of the time they go up, about 1/3 of the time they go down. Overall, they go up. So if we have a long-term perspective, you can get through all that. But along the way, you have to know that there's ups and downs. And we have had, in addition to the fact that May has been a good month, the other thing that we've had is that until yesterday when the market fell about 1%, which isn't that much, but we had days when the down days were, one day it was down, I think the S&P was down 0.03. That's negligible. It's like an even day. That's been the down days. So we've had so little volatility, but volatility is part of investing. You have to get used to it. If you can't stomach it, then you have to make sure that you adjust accordingly. I remember one of my favorite stories. I was talking to a client one day and I asked her a question and she said, Phil, from talking to you, I know that I don't need to check the market every day. It's okay. I know I'm confident you got things under control, but now you asked me this question. So because you asked me this question, I have to look. And so now if I'm unhappy with what I see, it's going to be all your fault because I wouldn't have even known or looked if you hadn't asked me that question. But that's really how a lot of people do it. I mean, in 2008 and 2009, or even if you go back to COVID, people take their statements and they throw in the drawers because they don't want to look. But in some ways, that's better than looking and reacting.
Yeah, this comes back to a study that Fidelity supposedly did that they won't admit to, which is they studied all the accounts and they found out that the people who did the best were dead. And I saw this news report, and of course Fidelity refused it, but I'm sure Fidelity is the one that planted the story to begin with. So Fidelity is great with PR. I tell you, they're masterful. They've always come out with these studies that they won't. That they'll put out the study and then they'll deny that they did the study. They did one years ago when I started. I was sitting in a room with a Fidelity wholesaler and I heard it, so I know it happened. It's not like one of these things that I forget what they call them, where these imaginary memories people have of like Nelson Mandela dying in jail, or like Shazam and Kazam, like all these. I forget what they call them, but there's these frameworks that people think that they they remember things, these faulty memories, and it's really interesting. Anyway, it's not one of those. um, but where was I going? I just lost my train of thought here. Hold on, something just happened outside. Where was I going with that, Phil? Sorry, we're gonna have to cut that out.
Um, the Fidelity study.
Oh, Fidelity. Sorry. Yeah, this is what happens when kids are running around outside and like doing crazy stuff. My bad. So yeah, so Fidelity. So they came out with this study. So the wholesaler's up there talking. He's like, the number of investors that under the number of investors who invest in Fidelity Magellan that actually got the performance of Fidelity Magellan was like, I think it was like 15%. 85% of the people who invest in Fidelity Magellan didn't make as much. And I think it was somewhere like 70% actually lost money. In the best performing mutual fund of that era, 70% lost money in that fund. Why? Because they were buying and selling. They weren't buying and holding. And that was the lesson that he gave. And I was like, okay, I don't care if he's accurate or not, but that's the lesson. And I tried to find that after I called the company. No one had that. It was almost like it was made up. Or they just told people and they just didn't give them the data to back it up. I don't know. But either way, they've come out with these things. And it's funny because it's great PR, right? Saying, oh, well, we didn't say that, but yet you're all talking about Fidelity, And so I think if I was running a PR campaign, that's exactly what I would do. No, it wasn't us. We didn't plant that story. Anyway, neither here nor there. But it proves the point, right? The people who don't look at their accounts tend to do better because they're not jumping out of windows when the stocks go down 5%, and they're not borrowing from their mortgage to invest in the market at the peak, right? They're buy and forget, which isn't the best strategy, by the way, but for some people, it's better than the alternative.
Yes.
Anyway, so let's talk about some interesting things. So I don't know if you heard the news, Phil, but Ethereum was apparently approved by the SEC to launch ETFs now. You see that news?
I did, and so it expands the universe, right? Because we just had Bitcoin was approved earlier this year, so it gives you other alternatives. And personally, I'm not a crypto person, but I do talk to people that are, and I understand why. But to me, there's a lot of speculation there. I have a tough time valuing it, and if I think about my roots as an investor, it's hard for me to get there. But to have more options is never a bad thing. And the SEC approving it is better than what we had before, right? Because if you think about what we originally had to invest, besides direct investing, you had things with really high expense ratios that were not the best vehicles. So now at least we have better vehicles. So if you're interested in investing in crypto, it does give you some other alternatives and do it in a more reasonable way.
Yeah, it's interesting. The story came out and it was like Ethereum's approved by the SEC, but the ETFs aren't launched yet. Right? It's not like Bitcoin, which was like instantly. It was like out immediately. Ethereum, it's not. I couldn't find anywhere in the news where the date was stated as to when they'll actually launch. So it's kind of like a false start a little bit. It's like, just teasing me right here. You're not like, but I find it interesting because we have this new technology, and I was actually talking to somebody yesterday who's a pretty thoughtful individual about kind of visionary type of person. And I was talking to him, I was like, if you had to think about, like, if you thought, like, people talk about the simulation theory, right? And like how we're all a simulation. And I was thinking about, I was like, what if this is a big game? We could choose any time in history to live. Like I'd want it to be now, right? Like you had the internet come out, you had AI launch, you have this biotech revolution, all this stuff going on there in the health space. You're going to be able to grow from stem cells from your skin cells. You're going to be able to reproduce organs, like crazy stuff. Like it's going to happen in the next 5 to 10 years. And all of this stuff is happening in our lifetime. Like I no one was around, but imagine when the printing press was created and how revolutionary that was. Like the printing press, really? Like, yeah. It's such a revolutionary thing, and all the stuff that's been invented in the last like 30 years, it's just absolutely amazing. So I find it's a great time to be alive, and it's very optimistic about the future. I know we have optimists and pessimists. I'm a little both because I think you have to be, but I think the reality is there's so much opportunity out there, and I love the fact that blockchain exists, and that all this technology is going to grow out of that. And the brighter side, you'd say, well, Ethereum's there, but it hasn't launched yet. But there was some brighter side of that news. At the same time, apparently, the House Representatives, the United States House of Representatives, passed a bill. Now, they only passed a bill; it's not law. Passed a bill that basically was the anti-Federal Reserve CBDC bill, which basically says the Federal Reserve cannot create a CBDC. That was the bill that was passed. Now, whether that passes the Senate or whether it becomes law, that's a totally different question. And whether it passed and whatever version passes, it might actually say in there, yes, the Federal Reserve can do this. Like that's how our government works. It's shady at best. But the fact is I think it's a great direction. I think the Republicans did it, and they got 3 Democrats on board, from what I heard. So that's great. That's great start. Do I think it's going to pass the Senate? I don't know. I mean, the way our government works nowadays, it's so corrupt. I don't trust any of those clowns to make the right decision, even if somebody was standing in front of them showing them what the right decision, be like, I don't see that. That's gibberish. I can't read. So I think it's interesting that that's happening, and I think it's awesome that that's happening. I think CBDCs are very dangerous, especially since you think about like Gresham's law, which, if you really think about like the cryptocurrency movement right now, right? You think about Gresham's law. I know you know what Gresham's law is, Phil?
I know I've heard of it, but I'm not placing. But I know I've heard of it.
Okay, you're not the libertarian that some of us are, Phil. So that's why you don't know it. So, but basically, Gresham's law is this: is that bad money chases out the good, or maybe it's the reverse. But basically, the way it works is that if you have U.S. dollars and then you have gold. Gold is solid currency, right? It's for thousands of years, gold has been the currency of choice, right? It's withstand the test of time. Paper, 50 years is the test of time that paper will stand, generally speaking, on average. So what basically means is when they start devaluing paper, more people are going to want gold, and gold is going to go up in price in comparison. So here's an example. At one point in time, I forget the exact date, I think it was 53, 52, somewhere in there. We used to have silver in our change, in not nickel, but quarters, half dollars, and dimes used to have silver in them. It used to be 70% silver. And then I know it was the Kennedy coin. I forget which year it was, but one of those years, the Kennedy coin, they actually put it up to, I think it was like 10% silver or something like that. But it was a much lesser amount. The point is, what happened after that? People started hoarding all of those old coins. I have a bag of those silver coins in my house, or maybe it's in my office, or maybe it's in a safe. I'm not going to tell you because I don't want to get robbed. But anyway, the point is, a lot of people have done this. They've gone out and they've hoarded these coins because they are now more valuable than the actual coin. So if you have a $50 and you have a $50 of silver, it's worth whatever I don't know what it's worth today. Like let's say $40, right? But the actual $50 is only worth 50 cents, right? But the silver part is worth 40. So it's not 40. I'm making up numbers. But the point is there's a big difference. So why would you ever use it? You wouldn't use it. You'd hoard it, right? You're not going to spend it because somebody will pay you 50 cents for it. You hoard it because it's worth $40. Now we can't melt down the currency, unfortunately, or if that was, I guess that's illegal. So we can't do that. But someone will pay you $40 for it if they know what it is, right? So the point is you cannot find these 70% silver coins. You can't find them because everyone's owned them. Everyone's hoarding them. So yeah, you might be able to find them, but they're hard to find because people go through all the change and look for this stuff. So what's going to happen now? Now the dollar is worth less and less every year. Crypto's going to, or let's say Bitcoin, for example, is worth more and more. Gold is worth more and more. What are people buying? Gold and Bitcoin. What are the central banks buying? Gold hand over fist. China, especially Russia, they're buying tons of gold. Why? Because gold has value. Currency won't. So I expect there to be a big sea change in the next 5, 10 years with global reserve currencies, with sovereign currencies, with just paper currency in general. I think we're going to be seeing a big sea shift. Now, whether that change over to a CBDC or not, a lot of that's politics. But I do think that the individual investors are going to find that it's really easy to just get some Bitcoin, put it into a thumb drive, and then, squirrel it away. And I don't have any money. The government comes pounding your door. Give us your money. Sorry, I don't have any. It's easy, right? In the old days, the reason that gold was a challenge is because governments could just seize it. They could attack another country and seize their gold, right? But Ethereum, Bitcoin, whatever you're going to use, I don't know what they're going to use for currency. But probably Bitcoin, if anything. But they'll have their own CBDCs. What are they going to do? Oh, sorry, I don't have any. I don't have anything. It's so easy to hide. So they can't easily attack another country and grab their wealth because you won't be able to find it. So the point is Gresham's law basically states that a bad currency will cause people to hoard the good currency. So they'll use the bad, they'll throw it away. Oh yeah, I'm going to spend my money on this, on hard goods, and I'm going to keep the good stuff, right? And the same thing's happening with Bitcoin, Ethereum. People are buying it and they're hoarding it. Like, people are holding it in their wallets and they're not using it because they're hoarding it. They're like, why am I going to give it away? It's going to be worth. Why am I going to buy a pizza with it when it's going to be worth 100% more, in a month? I'm just going to keep it and use my worthless dollars. That's how currencies work, and that's the direction we're going. And I'm using this as a kind of a training tool just to illuminate people on what is going to happen in the next 5 to 10 years. And when I say what is going to happen, obviously I don't know the future, but that's the direction we're going. And as long as the federal government is printing money and making our money worthless more and more every day, more and more people are going to flock towards the safe havens, whether it's cryptocurrency, whether it's gold, silver, whatever it might be. People are going to hoard things that have value, and they're going to get rid of the stuff that's losing value. So just something to keep in mind. What do you think, Bill? Phil, do you think we're going to go in this direction? Or I know it's not really mainstream. This is kind of like the tinfoil hat crowd thinking about this, but I do have my tinfoil hat, so I might as well put it on because that's what I was talking about.
So first, I'll just tell a little story. So you talked about people hoarding those old silver coins and all that. When very nice hat.
There we go.
When my mother-in-law passed away, when my wife was growing up, they used to have a duck, and they would call it feeding the duck, and they would throw coins in the duck. And every time the duck would get filled, they would take all the coins and they would put them in coffee cans, and the coffee cans sat in the basement. Well, after my mother-in-law passed away and my wife and her siblings were going through everything, they had all these old cans of coins. And because they were so old, there were silver coins. And instead of just spending them, those you take to somebody and you can get, like you said, you can get more for them. And they also found, just like the old pennies, if you remember the wheat pennies,
Yep.
I know it was 62 for the coins. I don't remember. It was around the same time for the pennies, but you could get like a penny and a half or 2 pennies for each wheat penny too. So they had to go through all these coins and get somebody to give them what they were worth, because it was just money that just sat there because nobody put it in circulation. I remember as a kid looking for that stuff. I never found it because everybody, like you said, hoarded it. As far as getting into current day, I guess I understand the point that you're making. The biggest issue I have when I think about digital currencies is the value fluctuates so much from day to day that it's hard for me to use that as a monetary, as a unit of exchange. Like you said, I could buy a pizza and I pay a half a Bitcoin or an eighth of, at one time it was probably a Bitcoin, right? And think about what that's worth over time. Regular money doesn't change in value that way. That's the hardest part for me of the argument for the digital currencies. They need to have more stability to become a medium of exchange. That's where I have trouble with that argument.
Yeah, you're correct. I mean, and by the way, I was having a brain fart. It's actually 90% silver. I don't know why I was saying 70. So those of you who've already left the show, apologies from hearing that. It's a brain fart Friday, I think is what it is. But anyways, 90%, and I was looking up the year, and I was like, wait a minute, what was I talking about? So it's actually through 1964 that 90% silver in the dime, a quarter, and a half dollar, and then and then it went down to 40% and 35%, depending on which coin we're talking about at which year. But to your point, Phil, is yeah, it is hard to imagine that things are going to happen a certain way. And we don't know, right? It's like people walk around and say, "Oh, they're going to confiscate our gold again." No, they're not, because there's no reason for them to. If you remember back, well, you don't remember because no one was alive back then, but back when they basically confiscated gold from the citizens and basically said, "Oh, we're taking all your gold. You must turn it in," and people said, "Oh, okay, sure. Here's my gold," and then they devalued the dollar like immediately. So they basically screwed the populace, and and that's not going to happen again. If they said, "Oh, everyone needs to turn in their gold coins," how many people do you think are really going to do that? Probably close to this number right here, zero,
Yeah.
right? Because the people who own gold in general, like not jewelry, because they wouldn't confiscate jewelry, but gold coins, are people who know better. So there aren't any random people using gold to buy pizza, right? It's just not a part of our society. So if they confiscate it, no one would turn it in. It would basically just make criminals out of all the people who have coins, but basically it wouldn't do anything, right? There's no value in them doing that. Now, if they said that for crypto, also close to zero people would turn that in. There absolutely would not happen, because all those people are smart enough to look at history and say, "Hey, I saw what they did with gold. There's no way I'm giving you my crypto. That's just dumb. Oh, you're going to exchange it for a CBDC?" All the people who own it are the people who are afraid of the government. So to me, I see things like, "Oh, they're going to confiscate," as just fear tactics. Somebody trying to sell you gold coins. So if somebody tells you that, just run in the other direction. They're trying to sell you with fear, and it's not smart. I've seen people do it. I've seen people make really stupid decisions because they're afraid. Just don't buy into that. Now, could they? Sure, they could. And aliens could come down and invade too. But I think the probability of that's just the same as them confiscating gold. So I think that's how you have to think about things. Like, how can you, if you want to protect yourself in the currency, own stuff that you keep to hedge against inflation or store wealth, and use the currency that's worth less every single day. Right. That's why you still use a currency until you no longer trust it, and then you stop using it because it's like Weimar Germany. And that's how hyperinflation happens, when people stop trusting the currency. And that's when it gets into 100% inflation a month, is when people stop trusting the currency. It's not because of inflation, it's because of trust. Now, we don't have a trust problem right now. So people are worried about hyperinflation. Right now, we don't have a trust problem. We may at some point in the future. I want to be clear. It could happen. The way the government's printing money, like it's going out of style, it very well could happen. But it's not happening today. So if you're afraid of hyperinflationary effects happening tomorrow, just take a step back, breathe, and take a look at what's going on. You realize that, yes, we have high inflation in some areas, albeit it is going down off the peaks. It is high inflation. It's not hyperinflation. We've had high inflation before. We've actually had inflation that was twice as high before, because we had inflation was up to like 20%. And I think inflation got up to like 9.1, 9.3. What was it? I think it was 9.1. So that's half of what it was. That's not even close to what it was before. So we're nowhere near hyperinflation. Now, it could pick up pretty quickly, right? I acknowledge that. If something happened and all of a sudden people stop trusting the currency, that doesn't happen overnight. That kind of happens a little slow. As they say, it happens slowly and then it just happens overnight. Well, you see signs of it when it happens slowly. We're not seeing signs of it. We're seeing signs of irresponsibility from the government. We're not seeing signs of hyperinflationary currency. Not yet, anyway. So just keep in mind, just because something can happen in the future doesn't mean you have to prepare 10 years in advance, right? Just be prepared so you know how long in advance you have, and just be a watch for it. And you can invest accordingly, and things could change and you can adapt. But that's why it's important to be agile with investing, right? Is you need to be able to adapt to changing conditions. I did want to bring up a few charts that I saw, which I thought were really interesting. One is you can talk about some of these, Phil, because I know there's more your background in the tax space. But here's here's something that I saw: tax burden by state, and I saw this and I thought it was. I haven't checked the facts, but directionally it seems to be pretty accurate. And it's really interesting, right? Just to see how different states are taxing people. And it makes you wonder, like, are some of these states going to retain population growth, right? If you look at Illinois, Minnesota, California, New York, Maine, Connecticut to some degree, well, nobody really wants to live in Connecticut. But, if you look at that, it does, you don't have to wonder very long to see one of the reasons why people are moving to lower tax states. What in your experience, Phil, have you seen with people with these kind of effect in taxes?
So it's a really interesting question because you talk to people and they want to retire and they don't want to pay taxes. And so they're looking for what states can I go to that don't have tax. And so one of the things that I heard probably a year or two ago, I first heard this that I thought was really interesting. And we think about go to Florida because Florida has no income tax. But remember, that's not the only tax burden that you have. There's real estate taxes, there's sales taxes. Those factor in too. So a lot of people now, instead of going to Florida, they're going to the east coast of Alabama. Even though Alabama does have an income tax, when you factor in the sales tax and you factor in the real estate tax, it can actually be cheaper to live in the eastern part of Alabama where you really have access to the same thing, right? You're just on different sides of the same water. But so you have the same kind of environment from a geographical perspective, but it's cheaper to live there. You have there when I talk to retirees and it's like, let's look at these options. Well, the tax cost matters and different states have different regimes. I grew up in New Jersey, which is one of the worst states for taxes because New Jersey is a gross income state. So they tax basically everything, that I tell clients about HSAs, health savings accounts. They're one of the best retirement savings vehicles. You can't even use an HSA in New Jersey. They don't give you that tax break at all. There's no deduction for money that goes into an HSA. That's how it is in New Jersey. So New Jersey has a really high tax burden for that and other reasons. There are, I have a client that lives in California, and if we look at his tax plan for he and his fiance, if they stay in California, their retirement outlook looks a lot different than if they move to Washington State, which is where they ultimately plan to go. Why? Because there's no income tax in Washington State. So these things do matter. And if you look at the chart, you can see there's a difference of a couple percent in terms of the tax burden in Washington versus California. And I'm assuming that this chart that you're putting up is counting in sales taxes and other things, because I feel like that difference would be a little bit more. I'm not sure, like if I think about Washington and California, but every state has its own, and you have to think about what the fiscal status of the state is. And the other day when we were on Kirkland, we were talking about pensions, and like those things matter too. And so if a state has has a pension system that's in bad shape, they're going to need to have a way to fund it. And taxes is one way that they can do that because they have these retirees that they promise money to. And taxes is the only way that they can really raise revenue. So these things do matter. It does make a difference. And it varies from location to location. I have clients when they're choosing between states, like what are the differences in taxes in each of those states? Because they care, because it matters.
Yeah, I mean, there's many reasons why people are migrating away from certain states for sure. I mean, California, Washington, you got crime problems because they've decided that criminals aren't criminals, so people are just looting and pillaging, without any repercussions. Of course, some of that's changing, but maybe a little too late for some of the states. But I mean, if you look here, I mean, New Hampshire, right? So I live in Massachusetts, is 8.6. New Hampshire, there's no tax, right? There's a bunch of states that have no tax. So I have to assume they're including all the tax because states like Florida, New Hampshire, I think Wyoming, I forget all the states. There's a bunch of states. Texas, I think. There's a bunch of states that don't have tax.
Texas is one, yes.
Yeah, so they don't have income tax. New Hampshire has real estate tax. That's how they pay. I don't think they have sales tax. Yeah, they don't have sales tax and they don't have income tax, but um, they do have property tax, and it's a high property tax. So I would assume that they're including all of that together as part of the bucket. Um, but I mean, look, I mean, people in Massachusetts, you're living on the line as you were staying geographically. If you're living like one or two towns over from New Hampshire, why wouldn't you just move to New Hampshire? Like it's to me, it just doesn't make sense. It makes a whole lot of sense to just move. There was a point where Massachusetts bumped up. There was a big pushback in Massachusetts for businesses on the Massachusetts border of New Hampshire. They're saying, well, people are just going over the border. I'm like, okay, so don't open your business here. Like go across New Hampshire. I mean, what, like I get it. I mean, that's one of the biggest challenges of some of these states. They're like, oh, we're gonna have a millionaire's tax. I'm like, good luck with that. All you're asking is for all your millionaires to leave. In
Yeah, I mean,
California, they're like, they won't let people leave. They're like, oh, if you have a big house, you can't leave.
yeah, you talk about New Jersey and I mean New Hampshire and Massachusetts. I have a client that her daughter lives in Massachusetts. When she retires, she wants to be near her, but she's not going to go in Massachusetts. She's going to go just over the border in New Hampshire. She's got a continuing care retirement community that she wants to move to. Why is she going to go to the one in New Hampshire? Because the tax burden's less, and she's not going to be that much further from her daughter, so it's still easy for her to get there, but her costs are less.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a big issue, and we bring this up not because the show's about tax, but we talk about trends, right? And this leads into a trend. If you looked at this map, and I wish we had one of these from 20 years ago, it was very different, right? Maybe 30 years ago, but it was very different, right? Taxes were generally lower. I mean, Vermont at 11%, New York at 12. I mean, the problem with New York is they've got high state tax because it's generally pretty rural. But then you've got the city. You got New York City, which has their state and local tax. So they have it's like I believe it's probably higher than 12 because they have the local tax, which is an additional burden for living in the city. So, but it's New York, so people want to live there. Point being is, there's reasons people go live in Greenwich, Connecticut. As high as Connecticut's 10%. No one wants to live in Connecticut. There's nothing. If listeners of the show live there, I went to college in Connecticut, so I have some background there. There's no reason to be in Connecticut except to evade the New York taxes. It's a beautiful state, but there's not a lot there. And the Hartford is a terrible capital. They can't retain businesses. They can't retain people. It's they've tried and the Hartford Whale is left. It's just not. They just can't find a way to turn the ship around. Now I can guarantee you if they put their tax rates down to like 2%, they'd attract a lot of people. But teach their own. So the point being is if you look at this trend, one thing you'll notice is rates are going up, right? I mean, all the states have increased. Minnesota's been increasing quite a bit. I know Doug's from Minnesota, so he's been complaining nonstop, and they seem to be out of control there. But if you look at the lower tax states, why are people retiring in Tennessee? Why are people retiring in Florida? Why are people retiring in Texas or all these places? Well, taxes is one piece of it. It's not the only piece. People move to New Hampshire to retire. Wyoming's a big deal. Like, it's not the only reason, but it matters, right? Especially if you're trying to pinch pennies in retirement, right? If you're making $100,000 a year and that extra $1,000, or say 50,000, that $1,000, that extra 1,000 you're paying in taxes, that adds up, right? And you're paying Massachusetts 8.6 versus 5.6. That's 3%. $3,000 on $100,000. That matters, right? Especially if you can't earn any more, and that's it. So I did have a conversation with an accountant yesterday, which I thought was interesting. And he seemed to think, based on his experience and his conversations he's had with people, the taxes are only going up. I don't agree. I don't. I think there's a limit to how high they can push taxes because at some point people just leave. At some point people move. Then the state gets more burdened, which means they have to raise them higher, which more people leave. It's just a negative cycle. And so, I think people need to understand that yes, they may raise your overall amounts you have to pay them, but it doesn't necessarily come in the form of income tax. It might be fees or penalties or whatever, like the Obamacare tax, these little things that get added here and there, which, all kind of adds up to a bigger number. But at some point, you become, what is it? Is it Sweden? I think it is. If you make more than 100,000 a year, you're in like the 90% tax bracket or some crazy thing. Like there are countries out there like that, and there's not a lot of innovation going on in those countries because there's no point. Why would you work hard if it all goes to the government?
I can give you the opposite case. It goes back a ways, but I used to do international tax work. And when I was doing that work in Ireland, they created something called the Irish Financial Service Centers. And they put a 10% tax rate on companies that did business there. And I know that was at the corporate level, but why did they? And what that did is that brought a lot of companies in to do business there. And what it really did is it turned around Ireland's economy, because by encouraging those corporations to go do business there, it brought in jobs. And so now people that might not have had jobs or been on welfare or whatever it was, now they had jobs because companies were looking to hire people because they had a real incentive to be there. So that's the other side. I'm not trying to get into a political discussion or anything, but there is an argument sometimes, just like we're talking about, go to New Hampshire versus Massachusetts, right? In that case, it was go to Ireland versus go to other places in Europe because you were going to pay a lower tax rate, and it was good for the country because it put their people to work. So the tax rates, there's pluses and minuses, so you can talk about raising, but at some point you chase away business, you chase away people, and it really isn't going to work for you in the long run. At some point it has to stop.
Yeah. And I think that's really the right framework, because we don't like talk politics in the show, but I think there's certain frameworks that are reasonable and certain frameworks that are not reasonable. People don't want to pay more in taxes. That's the truth. No one wants to pay more in taxes. I don't care if you're conservative, liberal, Democrat, Republican, whatever. Nobody wants to pay more taxes. Now, for those of you who do, I don't believe that you exist. You might be just posturing to, the social posturing to say, oh, I believe in higher taxes for the rich. Okay. Well, did you know that as of a few years ago, you could actually donate more money to the Federal Reserve, to the Treasury? That was actually not allowed prior to 2015, I think it was, somewhere in there. It was somewhere around there where you actually were not allowed to give more money to the Treasury. But at that point in time, and I forget which date it was, they actually changed the rules. So now you can contribute extra taxes. If you feel like the government is going to use your money in such a good way, better than you can, then now you are allowed to give them extra money voluntarily. So for those of you who think people should pay higher taxes, be my guest. You are now allowed to do that. And don't talk about what other people should pay. Pay your share. Oh, you don't have enough? Oh, that's too bad. Still, maybe you should pay more, right? And I'm of the agreement that, look, a lot of people want the rich to pay more because they're trying to attack the rich. It's not fair. They have more than me. I don't like my place in life because they have more than me. You know what? Life isn't fair. Get over it, right? Some people inherit money. Some people grew a big company. Some people win the lottery. Whatever the reason is, most of us don't have that kind of money, right? And if you're one of the lucky few in the genetic lottery that inherited money, or you're born with a gift of good genes to play, athletics, or a gifted voice, or whatever it is, more power to you, right? The rest of us have to work hard for a living, but that's just life, right? It's life isn't fair. So, when people talk about the rich paying more, they're not talking about the rich paying more because, oh, we don't have enough money and the whole country is going to go bankrupt if the rich don't pay more. No, they're asking them to pay more because they're trying to attack the rich. Now, all you're doing by attacking the rich is causing them to either hide it in other ways or to take it offshore to other countries. You don't think that'll happen? It absolutely happens, right? If you look at, for example, Maryland, when Maryland instituted the millionaire's tax, 85% of the millionaires left and went to a neighboring state. I think they went to Virginia or something. They left. So they repealed it. Oh, crap. We lost all our wealthy people. That happens. And if you don't think it happens, you're deluding yourself, because that is human nature. People are not going to pay more money than they have to. You want to have 70% tax, you're going to have the whole country move into Puerto Rico, right? Where there's no tax, right? People are just going to do what's in their best interest. That is economics. So, you know, politics, I'm trying not to talk politics. I'm trying to talk human nature. Good policy is when you align the policy with human nature. When policy goes against human nature, you're inevitably going to come up with pain and aggravation, because it doesn't align. It's like communism. The reason communism doesn't work is because it goes against human nature. You have people who are running it who want power, and the rest of us are like, oh, we should all be singing "Kumbaya" by the campfire. The reality is you look at China and the Great Famine in China. When I studied this in school. It's been a while, but basically all the farmers were required to put all their food in the center of the village, and everybody could eat whatever they wanted. Well, it was a famine because people just ate whatever they wanted and they didn't work, and so a lot of people died because of that. It doesn't work conceptually. On paper, it sounds good. Oh, we can all sing "Kumbaya." It doesn't work because it's against human nature. Look at old communist Russia. Oh, well, you get paid whether you work or not. Okay, so why am I going to bother working? You know, I remember when I was playing hockey against the Russians. Great kids, great players, great people, but their products stunk. We all wanted a Russian watch because it was cool. It was like, oh, no one has this. Like, I have a Russian watch, nobody else. The thing, you get it wet, and the paint would melt off, like the metal would melt. Like, it was terrible. It was like the worst constructed, watch ever. But you got it because it was cool to say, I have this. That was it. It was a piece of crap product. My dad was like, you don't want to exchange that. I'm like, I do, because I want to be cool. And he's like, all right, just know that it's garbage. And it was complete garbage. So my point being is, when you have incentives that align with human nature, you get better outcomes. And you can want something better. Just because you want it doesn't mean it's the right thing, right? I want to win the lottery, right? It doesn't mean it's the right thing. I want everyone to have $1 million. That's not going to go over well, because all of a sudden we'll have massive inflation, right? That's how that works. So my point is you have to align policy with human nature. So if you look back at the tax map that we showed you, there is our government officials are trying to globally get everyone to raise taxes. So you can't go anywhere. That's not going to go well either, right? So at the end of the day, what you have to realize is that taxes matter. People care. They want their money. If they work hard, they want to have their own money. And to be frank, our government is really poor at managing money anyway. So why do I want to give them any more? If they were doing a good job, I actually would have less of a problem with it. If the government said, I need a third of everybody's money, and we're going to do a much better job at spending it than anyone else can, I will happily give my third to the government to make everyone's life better. But that doesn't happen. So if you wonder why people don't want to pay taxes, that's the reason. Why am I going to give you money that you're going to spend on a $100,000 toilet? Like, I don't need you to spend my money that way. I could make stupid decisions myself. I don't need you to do that, right? So I think if people found a more sound government economically, I think we'd all feel better about it. But it's just not the case. So it's not a binary conversation, and I bring up all the different sides because I think it's a complex issue, just like immigration is, which we're gonna show a map on this too, which I thought was interesting. Then we're gonna wrap it up here. Here's the chart. So this is the net immigration by year fueled by population growth. So the green line is population growth. The orange is net immigration, and the blue is birth-death ratio. So what it's basically showing is that the population growth obviously was declining into 2020, and then it spiked. And we've had massive, and this has happened a bit when the election, when Biden got elected, we've had massive immigration. Now, I don't know how they're making this distinction, where they're coming up with the numbers, whether this is legal or illegal immigration. But when people get upset at the amount of immigration coming in, we talked about this in the show. It is a highly complicated issue. And, I'm all for immigration if it's done the right way, but we just decide to just flood the borders. That's not okay. But in general, I think if you think about it economically, if we don't keep up um, with the birth death ratio, meaning that we're losing population, that is a death nail for our country's growth. Japan is a good example of this. China is having similar problems. It's going to be a big problem down the road, and I don't think people think about this in a complicated manner. They think about it simply: we don't want illegal immigrants here. And the funny thing is that they don't. It's not that they don't want foreigners; it's that they just don't want people flooding the border. Like, put together a system and put them through a process. Take the people you want to take. That's what should happen, right? We shouldn't have this illegal stuff. We should just have a better system put together that allows people to apply and people can grant it. Because there's a reason that our government, whether it's Republican or Democrat, is allowing this. Bush was against illegal immigration, but he allowed it. And I guess they laid off a bunch of border agents during his tenure. So people have been allowing it for a long time because they need the help. We need more population. That's the truth of it. And we need people to farm the fields. We need people to do all the tasks that we're not willing to do. And so we need population growth. And that's the truth. How we do it, that's up for debate. But as an economic factor, we do need this, or we end up like Japan, and that ends up being a big problem long term. We could argue whether it's a good thing or not, but it's going to lead to pain if we don't have population growth. So just some factors to understand. Like I said, I'm trying not to take a side on this because I think it's a complicated thing. You could argue that maybe we shouldn't have population growth. Maybe we just allow the whole system to equalize. I could be on board with that too, right? But we need to understand the levers that are moving the system. So final thoughts from you, Phil.
I mean, that's an interesting chart, and I was reading some things about that. And that birth death rate, it's getting close to 2, and like that's the break even point. And in places like Japan and China, it's under 2, and that means their population shrinking.
Yep.
And if you think
Too.
back in the history of the United States, we're a country of immigrants, and so many great ideas came from people that came here from other places. Not There's a difference between legal and illegal immigration. I get it. But if you just close off your borders, it makes it easy for your country to start to shrink. And if you start to shrink, you're not going to have growth and you're not going to have development. It's not going to be the place to be. You're not going to want to be in a place that's not growing. I mean, it's really important to have growth. So you have to figure out what the right balance is. You have to figure out ways to let things happen legally. But immigration's important. It's a source of so many ideas, because we can't generate all the ideas on our own. They have to come from someplace.
Yeah. So final thoughts, Phil. Let's wrap
Sure.
up the weekend so we can all go enjoy their time off.
Yeah, so it is Memorial Day weekend, so I hope everybody has a good weekend. As for me, I work with women who are experiencing big life transitions, which I know can be stressful, and my job is to help empower women facing new beginnings with the financial knowledge and tools they need to make self-assured decisions. My firm's Apprise Wealth Management. I'd love to get to know you. If you'd like to learn more about us, you can download our free ebook, How to Flourish Through Life's Big Changes, at apprisewealth.com/ebook, and you can also sign up for our blog. Thanks for having me, Kirk, and have a great holiday weekend.
Yeah, thanks for coming on, Phil. We really appreciate you coming on the show. And that's the show for this week. Thank you again for joining us, Money Tree Investing Podcast. My name is Kirk Chisholm, Wealth Manager of Innovative Advisor Group. We don't just manage your wealth, we make your life better. You can find more about me at innovativewealth.com. And of course, you can find me every week here in the show. Please remember to subscribe to the podcast on the podcast app of your choosing. You can also check out the show at moneytreepodcast.com. On the website, you'll have access to the show notes, resources, and the archived shows. Also, we're now on YouTube. Please check out our YouTube channel. When you're there, please subscribe and leave a comment. Lastly, please leave a show rating and comment in the podcast app of your choice. Oh, and don't forget, do your own research. This show is for informational use only. We're not telling you what to think, merely how to think about investing. We're also not selling any products or services, and do not consider this advice. If you have any problems with the show, I blame Putin. Please send me an email and express your feelings. If you're seeking financial advice, talk to an oracle or a fortune teller, or maybe just a licensed financial advisor. I'm one, but as I said earlier, I'm not selling anything. But I'm easy to find. Have a great week ahead, and remember, no one will care about your money like you do. So invest in your life.